Forgiveness. The Christian gospel promises that God will forgive our sin. The Old Testament knows of forgiveness of sin. See, for example, 2 Chronicles 7:14, Psalm 103 verse 3, Jeremiah 31 verse 34. What then is the difference in the New? In one sense, very little. The Old Testament idea contained in the word of atonement and the removal of guilt. Take the second idea first. The Old Testament makes it abundantly clear that the guilt of sin is put right away as far as the east is from the west. Psalm 103 verse 12. And verse 13, God's compassion is on those who fear him, those who, verse 18, keep his covenant. It is here that we strike the difference in the idea of atonement, of restoration to union with God. For the Israelites, atonement is attained by an annual sacrificial rite. For the Christian, the idea of atonement carries a much fuller sense of restoration into close union with God. The parable of the prodigal son, Luke chapter 15, carries with it the wonder of undeserved admission into the warmth of the family, the joy the father has in forgiving the son he had given up as dead. So forgiveness is much more than just letting off punishment. It involves too a cleansing, 1 John 1:9, and Paul saw forgiveness so much in terms of justice, and he sees it too as reconciliation, Romans 5:10. Forgiveness and restoration, even at the human level, always involves the bearing of pain and hurt by the wronged person. How much more with God? To restore us to himself, God bore the pain and guilt of our sin. Jesus at the Last Supper said, "This is my blood poured out for the forgiveness of sins." In the death of his Son, God made possible forgiveness, the removal of guilt, reconciliation and atonement. The annual sacrifice of the Old Testament was replaced by the one sacrifice. Hebrews 10 verses 10 and 22. We have been made holy through the sacrifice of the body of Jesus once for all. Let us draw near then to God with a sincere heart, in full assurance of faith. In Jesus we are sure of the complete removal of guilt, Romans 8:1, and a complete restoration to God through Jesus, who is the one way. Even though the New Testament rarely spells it out, it is probably because the whole emphasis of the gospel is that in him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins, in accordance with the riches of God's grace. That's Ephesians 1 verse 7. If our forgiveness is by God's grace, then we are called to repent. We are also called to have faith. None of these things merit our forgiveness. They are merely the way in which we lay hold on what is offered. And the call is to forgive as the Lord forgave you. Jesus in fact says that unless we forgive, we shall not be forgiven. For we need to show love to receive love. Not that we need love, God or our fellow, to receive forgiveness, but for forgiveness to be released in us. It is the promise of forgiveness which releases love in us.